This is a very exciting discussion and a very relevant topic. Okay, cross-border data flows and privacy and all the host of issues surrounding it and what we need to do, what we need to be aware of, and what are the challenges lying ahead. Okay, what are governments doing about it, and what can individuals do about it, what should corporations do about it. So for this discussion, we have an interesting panel, a good mix, I should say. One, to my left is Shiv, who is the CISO for Freshworks. He's a product company, an upcoming product company. And it has a whole suite of products. And the interesting thing is it's cloud-based. Okay, it's a SaaS product. So this is Shiv. Then Bishakha, who is a policy expert. She is with directs the technology policy for IBM India. So she's Bishakha. She has long experience in policy and dealing with policies, policy making, contributing to it, and so on. And then we have Surya, who's from NAGARRO. So he's deeply involved with the mergers and acquisitions and the internal systems, IT servers. That means the moment you acquire a company, how do you integrate it into your system, the parent company? Okay. And also ensuring compliance as well as all the safety, security features and all the things that go with it. Okay. So let's start off this discussion. So first of all, cross-border data flows are the norm today. That means when we pick up a cloud provider for solution, for deploying our solution, we may be doing cross-border data flows. When we are selling to someone on the internet, there is the cross-border data flow again. Okay. When we are retrieving files, when we are doing a number of things all on the cloud and the internet, yes, it's given us provision. Internet has given us provision to do a lot of things seamlessly across the geographic borders. Now, where are the tricky areas? Those which relate to privacy concerns. That is one. So I'll divide it into B2B and B2C. So in B2B, it's heavily dictated by the contracts and saying what data can be collected, how it will be used, and so on. So for example, I've chosen someone to do my IoT solution, and he uses for my factory or my facility all the IoT sensors data, and he's using that in manners that he should not be using, then I have a right to take him to court, right? Or he should not be storing things and all that. Now, B2C is another game altogether. As we are familiar, we are all B2C customers, consumers of free services, email accounts, to storage, to you name it, right? Applications and all the apps, mobile apps and cloud-based apps. So their privacy concerns rule the roost. And currently you have the government coming out with a privacy bill, and that is a draft bill for which DSCI has given its recommendations. So there are some areas that are very good, some areas that possibly need more debate and discussion before they are implemented into law. So today, a user need not do anything specific like sending a mail or anything to even have data about him being collected. Examples, you walk into a mall, probably there is a video recording you. Okay, there are security concerns. How long are you going to store that video? How long are you going to store his picture? Have you associated it with his name for which he has come to do a transaction? So that is one thing. Now there are other aspects for which mandatory compliances need to be there. So for example, you have medical tourism in which people from other countries come in and then they have their medical healthcare checkups done, or when they get themselves treated, and after that all their records are there. So they need to be EU GDP compliant if they are from Europe. Similarly, travel agencies, they collect a lot of information about travelers. Now they need to be again EU GDPR compliant. So like this, if you see, it almost touches every aspect of our lives, and going ahead we will see that some transactions span the nations. It could be airlines, it could be, your facilities, hotels, your private information, personal information and all. So with that, first I'll get the first round of discussion rolling, and we'd say that yes, this cross-border privacy related user data, where it should be collected, stored, used and disposed of. I'd like your perspective, starting with Shiva.
Thank you, Doctor. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Well, to probably introduce myself, Shivanath Somanathan is my full name. I work as a CISO for Freshworks, which is a SaaS-based organization for customer engagement solutions. So we have been pure cloud from day one. It's been 8 years in a row, and essentially grooming ourselves from the SMB space. We have now geared ourselves to meet the mid-market and the enterprise market scenario. So obviously there's a lot of hue and cry about, you know, the privacy angle of things that have to be looked forward as well. But coming to the cross-border aspects of, you know, our business, if you will, being a pure global company from day one, in fact, our first customer happens to be from Australia, with absolutely no field presence in that country. And the essentials of ensuring that the logistics of all data handling that we do for our customers, you know, which can cross the borders of where we centrally operate, which is Chennai, India, had to be looked into from not only a legal statute standpoint, but also looking at, you know, the security of that data, whether it's in transit and whether it's at processing or at storage as well. So there is the aspects of making sure that we have reasonable measures to protect the data from being misused or abused, if you will, to also looking at aspects where we meet the obligations of the model contracts that will happen between the entities that we have in these regions as well. So I think as a company, we are very conscious about making sure that the local laws of the land, along with our obligations to our customers, whether it's contractual terms or whether it's even meeting the right to privacy, as Sir was mentioning some time before, are seated in the right form and manner. There is due diligence done, not only with the provisions that we incubate within the organization, but also with our extended ecosystem, which is our suppliers. So the true privacy by design and the true security by design for cross-border data flow management is something that we drive very voraciously through our process, through our governance, through our control assurance as we go forward as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Bishakha?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your patience for not selecting the better option, which is going for tea. Just to keep my answer very short, you asked about, you know, how do we basically use, store, and dispose data. From an IBM perspective, IBM has responsible stewardship of data, which is out there in public. It's been out for quite some time. In fact, much before privacy was something which was a hotly debated topic. So as a company, it's imbibed in the DNA. We believe in giving control of data to the clients to whom it belongs. Having said that, and if I step back from my company hat and, you know, just talk in general and bring the discussion to, you know, the privacy landscape which you started with, I completely agree with my fellow panelists here that privacy and security, I think these are the two pillars on which, you know, we basically decide, and which decides how we deal with data apart from the contractual obligations. And it's not either or. It's an and situation, really.
Yes.
And I think that's the whole debate that's happening even now. You know, what's being prescribed for privacy, does that equally apply for security, or is there a need to look at it differently? And I think we'll talk about that a little later. But as IBM, we have the responsible data stewardship principles across for all technologies, including AI, which is there in public, where we give complete control, completely empower our clients to whom the data belongs.
Yeah. Surya.
So at NAGARRO, we're a services company. We build products and tools that our customers can use to benefit their customers in turn. And privacy, security are inbuilt features of any applications that are built. Having said that, in order to generate value from these applications, it is necessary to have free data flow across the borders, and any other way would increase the cost of these applications and the cost of maintenance overall, and that may result in reduced services to customers or adding costs which today are affordable to many. So cross-border data flow is, should be inherent, and any policies which try to, stifle these, or, should, while keeping security and privacy in mind, should take into accordance the fact that applications and their value is only generated as data flows freely. And that's something that we've gotten used to over the last few years now.
Thank you. So it's very clear from this discussion that cross-border data flows are a given. Now, companies are taking steps to really take every precaution that they do not violate the privacy and they maintain the security of all the transactions they do, the data they store, the way they use it, and all that. Now, coming to compliance, if you take the EU GDPR, now there is a non-compliance breach of record keeping is about 10 million euros or 2% of the global income, whichever is higher. And if you did a deliberate breach or any unlawful transfer of data infringing on a person's right, then the penalties are double, which is 20 million euros or 4% of the global income, whichever is higher. So now coming to this compliance aspect, since we are in the middle of this game and many other countries are in this game as well, in which they want to finalize their law, you see that it should not become a burden. Compliance should be driven more by the commercial, that means the business value, the innovation, the scalability, technology, the use of applications, and so on, and not merely by the law, the legislation itself, right? Otherwise, it becomes a stone that is tied to your foot that is you're dragging along in order to meet it. So that should not be the primary factor for driving this. So in this context, what are the barriers that arise now? Now we are stepping into the real discussion. What are the barriers that could arise if we really had too much of regulation? How much is too much? And what should people do to protect their citizens who are there? And the citizens themselves, there may be an asymmetry of information wherein the parties that they are dealing with, I'll not take names, but all the cloud providers and all who are there, or the retailers, online retailers who are there, they have a disproportionate power compared to the consumers or the users of data. In such a case, how do you balance the equation? What needs to be done? So, any thoughts on this? Starting with Shiva.
It's a very interesting vantage point, and I think I'm speaking from personal experience here.
Yeah.
There used to be a time, and I guess it's still probably the order of the day for many organizations today, that security institutionalization is still compliance focused. Whether we like it or not, the fact that we actually get our budgets ratified is only because we're able to sell the aspect of making sure that we want to be compliant, right? And even though we get that stream through, there is no first order assurance that we give to anyone on the board saying that we will be completely compliant, right? The premise of security had come in, as being more compliance focused than being risk focused. But I think there are both merits and demerits. The merits are obviously the fact that there is more coherence right now in the top management and the investors who need to understand why this is necessary. Sometimes the long tail of security institutionalization within an organization requires compliance to be at the forefront, to be positioned for. So there is a merit in that in terms of getting the foot through the door and having the board convinced and getting the necessary budgets that you need to ratify security. But there is also the demerit as well, because there are, I think I can say probably in the last few months, if not years, we have had numerous laws and legislations that have come in for compliance around privacy, around security, if you will, and sometimes the contractual obligations that we are seeing, which are getting rewritten again, or restatuted again, are also dealing with penalties and omissions, and needless to mention the impact on cyber insurance that most companies are going through as well. So the long short of it is, compliance will always be seen as an overhead for every organization which is trying to do a fit-all regimen, if you will, in terms of getting compliance as the first order. What we need is probably a very agnostic approach towards looking at compliance, which is having something which is a common denominator of sorts. Perhaps the frameworks like the COBITs and the NISTs catching up to also provide us guidance in terms of how they can quickly revise their frameworks or realign their frameworks to meet some of these newer statutes that are coming in, and keep evolving as we go forward as well, so they are not static. And the organizations take leverage of those frameworks or those agnostic principles, by virtue of which they can be secure and privacy driven by design, and compliance follows suit from there. So that should be probably an ideal world, although we all are grappling with it. I'm sure as organizations we know it's not an easy thing to do, but nevertheless it's definitely a lot of time and effort being greatly spent. Hopefully they should also bring in avenues of automation, AI, ML, if you will, in terms of the enforcement regimen that needs to be brought in. But I still feel that that's pretty much hanging on the noose kind of a situation which most companies are grappling with today.
Yeah, thank you. Really a good answer, comprehensive one. Actually, if you look at the origins of this, looks like many laws throughout the history have been framed with physical goods in mind, physical boundaries in mind, and all that. So I'm sure all of you agree, right? Because if there's a chair, for example, you're doing, and you're shipping it somewhere, yeah, that's a physical entity that is crossing the border. But then when it comes to the virtual world, the laws are different. You can make 100 copies of a file at zero cost, practically zero cost. So this thing of crossing the borders and all that has become very, very easy. So our laws have yet to catch up with many of these things which are not physical yet. So there could be two aspects to two motivations behind many of the laws that are being framed. One is to bring all these cyber and these virtual worlds to get them in line with the physical laws that are already there, the extant laws. That is one. And then so that they fall in line and it's very easy to monitor and control, because that is the law of the land. So if you have the law of the land, you can say that yes, some transaction which happened on the server which is sitting in my purview, I can catch hold of the server, I can audit it, I can use it and all that, as against a server that is sitting somewhere else outside the boundary, where I may have no control over, maybe a server sitting in Argentina. Okay. So that could be one. The other thing is a conscious effort to say that I want to upgrade the infra of my country, and probably passing a law to say that all the data of this country needs to be within this country. So that will force people, that acts as a spur to the people to upgrade the infra and make more investments in infra, and that will boost the country's economy. Now, these are two separate things, probably should not be mixed, and that's how it goes. So I'd like to hear from Bishakha also on the earlier points and this one.
I completely agree with the point that you made, that it's very important to understand the intent of the law, and then and then translate it into what are the compliance requirements. Like you said, one, whether it's if you want to build an infrastructure, if you want to incentivize, there is an approach. If you're wanting to regulate because you need control, that's another reason why. And then, of course, if you want to provide privacy to the citizens, you want to protect consumer interests, that could be another intent. And each of them are not really interchangeable, and very rarely would a legislation meant for one meet the requirements for the other. So I think that clarity is extremely important. And you mentioned about how technology is very different from the laws that we are used to, which are in the physical world. Territorial boundaries versus seamless access across the world. And therefore, there is a learning and evolution process that we have to go through. All through the morning, we've been hearing about people wanting to catch up, laws trying to catch up, and that's a reality. So I think what's critical is a collaborative approach. You know, it's really not government versus technology. It's government and regulators and technology. And I think unless that happens, you know, any regulation which comes in may be disconnected and maybe you know, perceived as too much. To
Yes.
quote what you said, that you know, what regulation is too much. You can't solve data security problems through privacy legislations, for example.
Yeah, right. So they have to go hand in hand, and the laws framed should actually dictate that what they want to achieve and not necessarily how they want to achieve it. Okay, so yeah, over to Surya.
I completely agree with what you've been saying. It is the intent of the law, and if the intent of the law of most governments is mostly similar, if there's a harmonization and not necessarily, like you were saying, you know, do it in a certain fashion or must be implemented in a certain fashion, the intent of all these laws is to protect the citizen, their privacy, their data security. So the laws can be harmonized and still allow users to access services no matter where they're housed from, no matter where they're serviced from, while meeting the needs of law agencies and taking care of people in security. But I agree with you, Doctor, you know, saying that it should be done in a specific way in this country, keep, you know, all these other copies of data is very difficult to achieve also and implement.
Yeah, thank you. I think all of you touched on good points. So there is one segment which is the hackers. They are laughing their heads off probably because they don't follow laws anyway. Okay, so they'll say that yeah, anywhere anywhere cross border will darknet or whatever it is, we can breach and reach any place, right? So they really do not care. Now there was another case where, you know, technology. For example, in US, there was a time when, and that applied to physical goods, which I had mentioned. There was a sales tax in some states, and some states did not have that much sales tax. So a person in California, supposing he wanted to buy some goods, now when it went online, what these clever people did, these vendors did, was they put the server somewhere in Texas, so that the transaction is actually happening on the server in Texas when you went online, so he did not have to pay sales tax and the price would be lower and more competitive. Okay, of course they plugged all these loopholes later, but these were the kind of things that were happening. So now, given that technology will find ways to bypass the law and all that, so both are actually evolving, which means the policies should be evolving all the time, and also the technologies are evolving, the business models are evolving on one front. So we need to take a comprehensive view of things before we frame laws. For example, again another example is that of startups. So startups will suffer very badly if you impose the localization laws, because they need quick access, they need to test their business models out in real time, they need to get an MVP out, they need to reach customers. Some of the customers could be abroad, or some of them could be local, but they should be able to host their services on whichever is the convenient cloud provider that they find, and the servers could be anywhere. But they need to test their business model out first. So this is the kind of situations that you would run into. One of the favored models is that of the quadruple helix, in which there is the government, there are the corporations, which span the spectrum of industry, which spans the spectrum of from large corporations to the startups, and that is the second pillar. The third one is the academia and R&D, which are there. And the fourth one, most important component, is that of the users, the entire user base, the people who are using it. So you see all these cloud sourcing, open innovation, and all these things happening now. So for all these things to happen, I believe that the quadruple helix needs to be consulted, or that model should be carried in the mind. So that from the policy angle, from the industry angle, from the research and technology angle, and from the user experience perspective. Why do we talk about user experience? Because there is a fine line. Supposing some retail company wants to provide services, they'll say that, look, I need to collect the best information about you, personal information, so that I can provide personalized services to you. That is one side. The other side of the coin is that he's doing better and better business and using your information. So you need to give him the consent, and this needs to happen in a manner that is non-invasive. So around these points, I'd really like your perspectives. Starting with Shiva.
I think you brought out a very valid point, Doctor, about the fact that startup ecosystem is probably going to be is one of many that will be impacted with, localization avenues, if you will. Given that most startups depend on cloud journey, on, leverage of analytics, leverage of, the whole SMAC paradigm, if you will, to come up with, a prototype, a minimum viable, opportunity for them to show value proposition. And somehow, and if there are truly a B2C or a B2B to C, business model, then they would obviously need the ubiquitous nature of the cloud to serve their, customers, which could be global. And the fact that there could be avenues of localization and legislations coming in, especially in highly regulated industries like fintech and healthcare and the likes of those, actually brings down the opportunity to scale beyond the borders. So there are enough amount of incentivization that needs to be done for startup ecosystems to allow their wings to be spread beyond, just national borders, but also looking at markets which are the total addressable market space, which are even beyond national borders. Or they should at least be incentivized to provide services within the national borders, which can be equivalent, if not better, in terms of return of investments that would come in with goods and services purchased within the country. So it's a catch-up game. I think eventually the policymakers, the industry consortiums, the academia, the proliferation of innovation that we have to get into, I think it has to happen in tandem. We are seeing those days where people are, still finding loopholes in the systems, especially in the policy frameworks, to actually still do and, get through the foot through the door and innovate and be more creative and still meet their end objectives of driving their business models. But we are also seeing people who are very consciously statuted to make sure that they're meeting local laws of the land more than anything else, because they don't want to subject themselves to, the penalties and the omissions that would probably come in should they be found guilty, if you will. But as an organization, I think from where Freshworks, as we stand, we have always been global first as an organization, if you will, and global also included the aspects of looking at the Indian market as well. Localization did bring a certain amount of overheads in terms of how we position the service, and it also required a bit of disruptive thinking in terms of how we serve the markets within the borders of the nation as well. But I think there has to be a beautiful balance in terms of how we can harmonize between the statutes of the law as well as how we provision our services and the structure of data governance that we put in from a control security layer, if you will, that should see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I agree. So harmonization is key, because ultimately value that is being provided, in encouraging disruptive models, if you will, business models and all that, that is key, provided you don't overly break rules and laws and intrude into privacy. So that should be the driving forces for the next era. Yeah, Bishakha.
Right. So I think data is valuable, and that's a truth that we have seen, and that's not new. I mean, the whole concept of Six Sigma, for that matter, is completely data-driven, right? The whole manufacturing excellence is data-driven, and that precedes any internet economy that we talk about. So value of data is very well known. I think what we are looking at are, making use of new kinds of data, how they are being now analyzed, and what kind of new insights that are emerging, which are being which could be leveraged for monetization. And And you know, to be fair, if we look at how this whole thing started, at least on the internet, was that people really had no idea. They were just collecting data and trying to figure out how they'll monetize it later. And that's exactly what happened. So did they break any rules and regulations? Perhaps not. But at the same time, privacy is also very inherent and fundamental. I don't think you need a law for you to be offended if somebody is using your personal information and trying to do something. You would at least want to know, and you would at least want to say yes or no to it. So somewhere I think it's a weird situation that has led to this this condition where we have rising nationalism, so to say, because we are really fearful of misuse. But a lot of things are fundamental, and a lot of corporations also fundamentally adhere to those principles of use of data and how they're collected. Consent you spoke about is key, and consent is key, and consent is very meaningful in a business-to-business environment. But you know, on the consumer front, it requires a completely different meaning. You need to be aware of it. And these are some of the pieces that really have to be built on before any regulation becomes effective.
Yes, agree. So there has to be some clarity here, meaning that national data of national importance, sensitive data, all those things are anyway within the borders. Nobody's putting them, nobody's saying that put them on a server, on a cloud, in a neighboring country, or something like that. So it is really the other kinds of data where the government should spur new business models. And that is what the industry really needs, that's what the people really need. So yeah, over to you, Surya.
So my point of view on this is, as more and more data is collected by systems, they are able to offer you better services, more intuitive services.
Absolutely.
Which I think we almost come to expect and even want. Applications that can anticipate your needs are here, and they'll continue to anticipate your needs better. Now, like you were saying, Bishakha's awareness and what we consent to is probably something that we as users need to educate ourselves in, need to be aware. But putting them in watertight containers is probably not the way to go. And as the laws catch up, newer use cases will emerge, and they should. And we'll continue to work towards it as long as companies are ethical and work off the ethics as a fundamental principle that cannot be defined and written up and codified all the time or be anticipatory in nature. You'll still be catching up, and I think that should work.
Sure. Very good insights. So there is no point in taking an extreme position, because the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Now, so for example, the right to be forgotten, which is there in the bill. Okay, clearly if you're using something like blockchain technologies, that may be very difficult to implement, because by the very design of those technologies, they intend to keep the records. You cannot go back and erase some of the records, right? So in that manner, there is a certain spectrum. At the same time, it doesn't give you the license saying that I will store every data, I don't care, right? Every piece of data. So somewhere there has to be one has to draw a line, and there is nothing like the last word in the subject. So just like software versions, probably the versions of the policies will keep evolving with the technologies and the new business models that come up. For example, one of the things, use cases, as I mentioned, use case could be that you want to provide, let's say, healthcare, a very good quality healthcare to primary healthcare centers in India. Okay, now with internet and high resolution cameras, it is possible to examine a patient remotely. So you have these patients somewhere in the healthcare centers, primary healthcare centers, away in the villages. Then you could have the doctors somewhere else, and then you could have the patient record somewhere else, and probably an insurance plan that ties all these together, right? So they need not be even in the same geography. Supposing there is a person across the borders who is a doctor, who is free, who is an expert, and he can examine some of the patients, he can probably do that, right? So you need to have something. At the same time, you need to protect the patient's privacy and all his records. So we need to specify the what and not the exact implementation of the how. Anonymization of data, as well as the metadata that you collect, all these form different aspects of it. So as I said, these are in an evolving stage, and there should be several versions of the policy open for debate every time new technologies arise and new business models arise and so on. So with that, I think probably it's time to open it up for audience discussion. Any questions from the audience? Would be happy to take. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Sir, actually regarding Data Protection Act, I just want to ask that what will be the fate of the data which has already been collected before the law comes in force? Like, will Google means transfer the data, like in the data localization, will they be transferring it here? And second, what about the consent for the data which has already been collected?
Yeah, I can't speak of a specific company, but
Okay, sir. No,
yeah,
I just want
in general, yeah. So again, there is no neat, clean answer, but the fact is that people should have the right to know that what data has been collected about them. Okay, what data has already been collected about them, and they should be able to look at it and say that what can they retain, what do they want to remain, simply eliminate. Okay, to the extent that is possible, and companies should also put that in writing. So that's a good point to start with. I'm not saying there's a point to end with, but probably once it comes into the purview of the law that is going to be enacted or enforced, then all of them will have to fall in line and comply with that. Maybe not immediately, but over a period of time. I do not know if everybody has complied with EU GDPR right away. There could be several non-compliances, but over a period of time, people will fall in line and will comply.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
What are government's guidelines and regulations on the remote connectivity with respect to predictive maintenance, etc., or patch management in different countries, which they ask for us to provide 24/7? Is it permissible?
Sorry, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that whether patches, people,
No, for predictive maintenance,
Yeah.
for
they collect data.
they collect data, yeah, two-way from
Yeah.
PLC part.
Sure. So that is also with consent, and that also happens. It specifies what kind of data they're going to be collecting. But I'll let the others answer. Yeah. How do you do it in Freshworks?
I'm sorry, could you get the context again? You're talking about the patch management and...
For
Yeah.
certain applications, they are asking for 24/7 remote access to give maintenance and predictive maintenance also, and also for patch management, etc. They want it. On the OT front, CIEs, our
Got it.
critical infrastructure, information infrastructures.
Sure,
So like ICCS, DCS, or other OT environment.
that's right. That's right.
So what is the government's guideline on that?
So I think I can't speak for the government's stance here, but generally,
Because vendors say that is possible. Technically, we also know it's possible because we are regulated by government.
right. So I think there is always a reality check, and what's the intent of such statutes as well that you have to keep in mind of. I don't think any organization across the world can even claim to fame that they have patch management all, geared up in the sense of or the true spirit of what it is really meant for. I'm just giving an example, right? But there should be definitely intent shown, which is to make sure that you have continual visibility of your exposures, continual workflows that go in to make sure that for your realizable inventory that you have, to institutionalize your patches, you have your program working, the change control process, the test and enforcement of those patches. So, the 9 yards about, if I have to take patch management as an example, right? Critical infrastructure is obviously a whole new ballgame because the sensitivity of both the data that's being managed in the infrastructure as well as the availability and sustenance requirements for those infrastructures is obviously warranting to have certain reasonable higher level rigor, if you will, on maintaining these strictures. So therefore, you can't do it a one size fits all. You'll have to slice and dice it based on risk profiling of your assets. Start at the critical assets in the same year and make sure that you have enforced them, perhaps with an automated workflow modeling, and then go down the line to make sure that at least the rest of the supported ecosystems are also following in the same trail as well.
Yeah.
But I think patch management will always be a catch-up game. But the truth be told, if you take 9 out of 10 breaches that we have always been notified through public channels, they've always been because patch management was the root cause, right? And which means that our enterprises, corporations, even government statutes and institutions as well are still grappling with the basic addendum of making sure that their critical infrastructure is always fortified to the best levels they can, at least for known vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
The unknown vulnerabilities and the known unknown vulnerabilities are still something that people can only catch up on. But as long as you reduce the mean time to detect and respond to such requirements, you're at least in a fair good posture of saying that your cybersecurity stance is at least something which might not be 100% holy grail of security, institutionalized, but at least it's there to manage the worst case.
Can't hear you. Yeah.
Does Government of India allow?
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
yeah,
I didn't
we
get the
can
last
take it
part.
later. Yeah. I think we'll have to take that.
We'll
little later,
probably
yeah.
take that offline
Yeah,
because
take
I
it
think there are
offline,
statutes where remote connectivity can be talked from different parlance as well, but that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
No, that's
So-
very. Yeah.
For critical services which impact the national importance, right, so I think there is a statute of legal right to intercept, essentially which the government has.
Yes,
Right, right.
DevSecOps is. No, I think we can take this offline, but the whole intent of the entire thing is the more critical the function, the more there should be checks and balances. Obviously, if somebody is patching an autonomous car as against simply a Windows application or a gaming application, it has to go through more critical SLAs and more checks and balances than what is normally there. So that depends on the function of the risk, obviously, and it's driven heavily by the contracts and all the things, utilities, critical utilities, for example. They need to go through more checks and balances for patching and all that. So yeah, it's an open area, but DevSecOps is getting tighter by the day. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, I guess we are out of time. But thank you very much for being a patient audience, and thanks a lot to the panel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. With that, we have come to an end of this session. We'd like to thank each one of our panelists here.